another State of the Nation. We release this every Tuesday, generally 2 o'clock or so Eastern. Comes on the podcast and YouTube, live streaming that way. Also via podcast the next day. David, we got to talk about this, man, because this is the big headline. This is historic. El Salvador has adopted Bitcoin. That is the topic for today's conversation. Who's the guest we have with us to talk about this important subject?
The guest that we have brought on is Nic Carter, who was the host of the Twitter Spaces. Apparently, it was supposed to be just a casual Twitter space, but in this crazy world of the 2020s, in casual Twitter Spaces, presidents of countries show up while bills are going through the Congress to make Bitcoin legal tender. So apparently, that's things like this happen in the 20s. And so we are bringing Nic Carter on to not only talk about that crazy event and Twitter Spaces as like a news media publication at large, but also more importantly, an entire country putting Bitcoin as its legal tender currency. The Bitcoiners of the world are up in arms about how awesome this is. Nic used this term that when I was listening to him talk on maybe his own podcast about how Bitcoin is being used as its intended purpose. And I think the intended purpose line is interesting to drill into, because who's to say what Bitcoin is actually intended for? So I want to get Nic's perspective on that. And then on the other side of things, there's a different cohort of people who are a little bit skeptical as to like what is this really the big deal that the Bitcoiners say it is? And so we want to take on both sides of the news event on this State of the Nation.
Suffice it to say, Nic Carter is probably our favorite Bitcoiner. Would you say that, David?
Yeah.
Our favorite Bitcoiner? I mean,
absolutely.
Like, how many times has Nic been on the show?
This will be number 4. Second podcast. He's been on 2 podcasts, and this is his second State of the Nation.
Number 4. All right. So he's earned his Bankless t-shirt, but like Nic is the person to talk to you about this subject. I think the first half of this conversation, we plan to talk mostly about the good side of this. All of like the reason that this is a perfect fit for Bitcoin. In the second half, we're going to talk more about the critiques. Super excited for that conversation. But David, before we get in, we got to talk about what's new. We are still looking for our perfect Bankless editor. If that is you, if you're an editor, if you're a writer, if you like DeFi, if you want to join the Bankless team, we've seen tons of applications. We're looking for the perfect one. But email your resume, sample of your writing is more important. Your Twitter personality, whatever you have, to applications@banklesshq.com. Do that. David and I review those on a weekly basis or so, and we're excited to hear from you if that's you. Also, David, got to talk about Ledger. Ledger's doing some cool stuff in the space. Hey, I put out this meme. This is me. Not all the memes on Bankless HQ are mine, but like I was thinking of this as I was using my Ledger the other day. This is like your grandpa's non-custodial wallet was just like a pot full of gold, right? Gold coins.
Buried gold coins.
But what is yours? I mean, Grandpa didn't trust the banks. Yours is probably a hardware wallet like Ledger. It was super cool, David. It's actually, I think it was last week, the week before, MetaMask support for, there was a new Chrome update, and MetaMask support with a Ledger was actually disabled, didn't work. But you could actually still use Ledger using Ledger Live. And that was sort of another mechanism, another way of using the Ledger that I hadn't used as much before. But Ledger Live is super cool. It is a piece of software put out by Ledger Hardware, and they've added so much more to it probably since the last time you checked. All of these crypto services, so you can buy, sell, exchange, lend, and stake,
all the verbs,
getting into DeFi services,
all the money verbs,
all through Ledger Live. So that's super cool. Yeah. What else should we add with Ledger, David?
Yeah, there's a lot of new people subscribing to Bankless and coming into the world of banklessness, of crypto. And Ledger has always been the easiest hardware wallet to use. And they also have now a bunch of back-end software to live a bankless life inside of the Ledger ecosystem. So it's a great first stepping stone into a very complicated world that packages up all the DeFi services into a very nice interface, along with the top tier security of an actual hardware wallet. Not your keys, not your crypto, but then also Ledger and its partners allows you to do all the money verbs that we talk about on the Bankless program.
So check Ledger out. If you don't have one, go to bankless.cc/Ledger, check that out. Or also, if you have a Ledger, start checking out the Ledger Live application. David, I'm going to ask you the question I ask at the beginning of every single State of the Nation since we started these things. That is, what is the state of the nation today?
The state of the nation is expanding. In the Market Monday piece that I put out yesterday, I used this metaphor, this Risk metaphor. If you've ever played the game of Risk, it's a game where you have different territories and you have like different armies positioned around the borders and you try and claim the next border. Bitcoin just claimed El Salvador. And so it is now instantiated in the Risk board, an orange country, El Salvador. And the question that we have for Nic Carter is, where does Bitcoin go next? Where does it expand next? I'm getting like kind of flashbacks, not flashbacks. I never was alive back in the 70s or 80s, but like of the Cold War with the USS versus Russia and like the
containment strategies.
Yeah, the US, like think of the perspective from the dollar trying to contain Bitcoin, right? And so we got Bitcoin advancing out of El Salvador. We got the dollar trying to contain it. But if El Salvador falls, what about Costa Rica? What about Panama? What about the other dollarized countries of Latin America? Like, is this the Bitcoin domino effect about to happen? And so Bitcoin is expanding, and it's claimed El Salvador, and who knows what happens next.
What's so interesting is in order to claim like countries and territories in a game of Risk, you have like soldiers and, cannons and that sort of thing. But Bitcoin is doing this without soldiers, without an army. It's just doing this through idea propagation, essentially. So this is a super important story. I think we call this historic. This is absolutely on every single timeline of like, 20th century, 21st century evolution of money. The date June 2021 will be there because that is the date that the first nation state actually adopted a cryptocurrency as legal tender. And like, we're here for it. So guys, stick around for this fantastic conversation. We're going to introduce Nic Carter in just a minute, but we want to thank the sponsors that made this episode possible first.
Synthetix is Ethereum's decentralized derivatives liquidity protocol. What does that mean? Synthetix is a platform for creating and trading synthetic assets, which are assets that are priced via an oracle rather than bids or asks. Traders can use the Quenta exchange, which hosts and trades all of the synthetic assets created by Synthetix. Traders on Quenta can trade synthetic tokens like SBTC, SOil, or SDeFi. Because Quenta is powered by Synthetix, traders experience zero slippage on their trades. No, I didn't mean low slippage. I meant no slippage, because that is the power of the Synthetix platform. No slippage on your trades. You can also easily short assets with iSynths, which are synthetic assets that move inversely to their target asset. Synthetix isn't just for traders. Developers can build on Synthetix to access the infinite liquidity offered by synthetic assets, or investors can stake collateral to the protocol and earn fees that the protocol collects. If you're a trader and you're looking for a trading platform not found in the legacy world, check out Quenta.io. If you're a developer or you just want to earn yield on your collateral, go to www.synthetix.io, where you can stake your SNX or ETH and earn fees from Synthetix. AAVE is a borrowing and lending protocol on Ethereum, and just recently released AAVE version 2, which has a ton of cool new features that makes using AAVE even more powerful. With AAVE, you can leverage the full power of DeFi, money Legos, yield, and composability all in one application. On AAVE, there are a ton of assets that you can deposit in order to gain yield, and all of those same assets can also be borrowed from the protocol if you have deposited collateral. Here you can see me getting a 200 USDC loan against my portfolio of a number of different DeFi tokens and ETH. I'll choose a variable interest rate because it's a lower rate than the stable interest rate option, but I could choose the stable interest rate option if I wanted to lock that interest rate in permanently. One of AAVE's V2 features is the ability to swap collateral without having to withdraw your assets, trade them on Uniswap, and then deposit them back into AAVE. AAVE does all of this for you all in one seamless transaction, so you don't have to repay loans in order to change the collateral you have backing them. Check out the power of AAVE at aave.com. That's AAVE.com.
Hey guys, welcome back. Super excited to dig into this with Nic Carter, fourth time on the show. He is a partner at Castle Island, a recurring guest on Bankless. We've called him our favorite Bitcoiner. I think you heard us say this. So Nic Carter, you are our favorite Bitcoiner that we have on Bankless. And you were really at the center of this whole El Salvador thing. So welcome, man. We're super excited to talk to you about it.
Thank you. And thanks for making me your official favorite Bitcoiner. That means a lot. Fourth
Yeah,
time on the show too. I know it's been a really long time since I was last on though.
it has been. It's been like months. You know, we were talking about this. It's been 11 months. It feels like it was way sooner, but like so much has happened, including the adoption of Bitcoin by a country, which is the subject of today. I want to ask the question of like, this feels like a big milestone to me. I know some people say, look, El Salvador is not that big, but like it is a nation state. It is a country adopting Bitcoin. Did you think this would happen in 2021? Or like, what was your like mental date for the milestone when this type of thing would happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like delusionally bullish Bitcoin at all times. So,
Spoken like a true Bitcoiner.
So I sort of always expect the best possible thing to happen immediately. So I speculated on my own podcast about, the first sovereign country to like truly adopt Bitcoin, but I thought it was going to be like Norway or Singapore or something,
Yeah.
like a really, like, I don't know how to describe it, but just a country that, really deeply understands like sovereign wealth and like, I mean, Singapore already kind of has exposure to Bitcoin through Temasek, I think. But yeah, I didn't think it'd be El Salvador. I didn't think we'd get a legal tender law. I didn't think we would get actually like a legal tender mandate, as in like merchants are mandated to accept Bitcoin. That was far, far more than I expected. What I thought was that sovereigns would start
Buying it.
just converting some of their foreign exchange reserves into Bitcoin. But this is different, completely different, and very unexpected. But yeah, kind of on the timeline I was expecting. But again, I'm like super like delusional about this stuff. So
Okay, but so we're pretty delusional about crypto too, right? So like I don't think people have ever listened to a Bankless podcast that wasn't bullish like crypto in some way. But is this did we overhype this in the intro a little bit? Like so my question is like this seems like a pretty major historic event here, right? Is everything going to be different from here on out? Like there was a before a sovereign country adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, and then there's an after. Do you think it's that much of a change agent, or is this just another like piece of the evolution of global adoption?
no, 100%. This is, I would say, one of the most pivotal points in Bitcoin's history, and on a par with like when Bitcoin first monetized with that Bitcoin pizza transaction. So this is at that scale of importance. And I say that because like first Bitcoin was this like, empty like ledger slots that had no value, and then it obtained value. And then it was a collectible or like a synthetic commodity. So it was sort of monetizing, but it wasn't explicitly money in like the sense that an economist like George Selgin would describe it as money, which is a generally accepted medium of exchange. It wasn't generally accepted. And then by decree, by law, it became a literal money uh, in a entire country, and that's the first time anything like that has happened. So yeah, I think it's absolutely pivotal.
Let's just
Of course, like like from like a narrative sense, of course, like does that mean that millions of more people are actually going to adopt Bitcoin? No, but in terms of like the taxonomy of money, it's transcended into this new category now.
Let's talk about just keep harping on the significance of this really quick, because let's just imagine you're talking to somebody that is, they've heard of Bitcoin, but other than hearing about it, they don't really know what it is. And you're trying to explain to them the significance of El Salvador or any country really adopting Bitcoin as currency. How would you explain it to someone who is just, doesn't really understand what crypto as a whole is? Trying to explain it from that perspective.
I mean, effectively, we had El Salvador had a dollarized monetary system, which meant that effectively dollar was the currency of the land. I believe they actually do also in tandem have a local currency, but it's just been kind of irrelevant for a long time. In parallel to that, now there's an additional monetary system, which is legal, where Bitcoin is on an even kind of par with dollar from a legal perspective. So from a tax perspective, in terms of the tax treatment of transactions, in terms of actually paying your taxes, in terms of being the accepted and legal tender for the settlement of debts, and in terms of merchants having an obligation to accept this. So in every conceivable way in this country, assuming this law, actually gets implemented and things like that, you're going to look at Bitcoin being elevated to the same, level of significance in terms of, your legal rights and obligations with respect to the medium. So effectively, now El Salvador is on this dual monetary standard, dollars on one hand, Bitcoin on the other. So it's been elevated to sort of an equivalent status.
One of the big deals here is that El Salvadoran citizens don't have to pay capital gains tax on their Bitcoin. Can you fit that into the story as well?
Yeah, so in the US, Bitcoin is taxed as property, and actually all cryptocurrencies, crypto assets. And so that means that when you make a transaction, you purchase something with Bitcoin, the tax code interprets that as a sale, and you are then taxed on the difference between when you acquired that Bitcoin and the value of it when you sold it. So you have to keep track of that, and then you have to pay a short or long-term capital gains tax, which is an enormous hurdle. And that's actually really how countries like the US maintain this monetary hierarchy with stuff like tax treatment. There's no like explicit law saying, the dollar has to be worth something, and, the dollar is like sacrosanct. In practice, what we have is, a bundle of like laws and sort of processes which, encourage the dollar to have value and sort of instill it with value. And tax treatment is, paramount among them. And that's how other foreign currencies and foreign assets and things like that are disempowered at the expense of the dollar. So eliminating that tax hurdle and that just friction through tax, that's a really, really key thing in sort of elevating Bitcoin to sort of this egalitarian status.
Yeah, I think people totally forget this. Like, I've said this a few times because I believe it's true, and I've heard others say it, but like, I think the worst UX for crypto is actually in the tax code, right? So like there have been moves even in the US to sort of pass some safe harbor sorts of legislation that say under a certain amount of crypto you spend per year, say that's not like taxed as capital gains, it's more taxed as a currency as money, but that's never gotten anywhere. I think people forget that like countries don't have to make something like cryptocurrency illegal. All they really have to do is make it majorly inconvenient through their existing legislative processes. And right now, using cryptocurrency for anything other than a store of value is like majorly inconvenient just because of the capital gains tax code. It's like, so here's a for instance, right? So according to the tax code, every time you make a transaction on Ethereum, pay some gas, right? There's a capital gains event there, right? Like it could be small, it could be like, very, very de minimis, but like that's UX friction. I mean, I'm paying a few dollars in Ethereum gas, and there's a capital gains tax event on there, and I have to track that. So yeah, +1 on your point there is countries with their existing tax code already make the UX of cryptocurrency very difficult without even having to make it illegal.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in here that I wrote about this for your newsletter, actually, back in the day, Crypto Fiat Mutualistic or Parasitic. And I specifically talk about the implicit and explicit privileges of the dollar and sovereign fiat relative to all other near monies. And, crypto is like a near money, like it has value. People treat it like a money, but it lacks a lot of these explicit privileges, and the tax treatment is like probably the most important one.
You see now why Nic Carter is our favorite Bitcoiner, because he even refers to past bankless issues as he's making his points. Here's the article that he mentioned.
Oh, you guys have it. Yeah. Yeah.
There he is.
You scroll down, I literally enumerate the dollar's explicit privileges, and then like the something. It's funny, like there's so many more stable coins today as opposed to one like this.
What was the size back then? This is from May 2020.
May
Time
2020.
flies.
So here,
We're
15
at 10x from
billion.
here, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah, just about. Yeah,
That's crazy.
insane.
So
But yeah, so there's implicit and like, you know, these emergent features, like the fact that, you know, if you want to participate in like US securities markets, you need dollars, like stuff like that. So there's like the very explicit stuff and there's the implicit stuff. And then El Salvador has, you know, worked on the explicit side. Obviously TBD on, you know, what happens though.
Right. So, Nick, let's get into the background of President Nayib Bukele. And, you know, since he hopped into your Twitter spaces, I can only assume that you guys are friends now. What have you learned about President Nayib before this event, right? Like before that, the announcement went public that El Salvador was going to put forth a bill that would ratify Bitcoin as legal tender. Where do you think Bitcoin entered in President Nayib's life? Like how did he become pro Bitcoin? Do you know anything about the backstory here?
That's a great question. I believe that it had a lot to do with Bitcoin Beach, which is this kind of like nonprofit initiative designed to encourage people to transact with Bitcoin in this specific beach town in El Salvador. And I had heard of a lot of Bitcoiners going down there. Like my friend Miles Suter had spent a ton of time down there with Jack Mallers. I believe Peter McCormack was down there. I actually thought about going long before I knew anything was going on from a monetary perspective, just because I thought it was cool. I think it's called El Zonte. And apparently the merchants there accept Lightning transactions and stuff like that. I haven't been, so I can't really, you know, talk about it with that much detail. But my understanding is that is probably how the President Bukele, you know, first kind of, you know, got turned on to Bitcoin. But I mean, he could have learned about it from anywhere, frankly. I mean, from the internet. He's like super plugged in. He's a very like tech savvy president. I mean, a lot of people compare him to AOC in terms of his level of like online reach and like how active he is on social media and stuff like that. So it wouldn't surprise me if he had, you know, like learned about it on Reddit or whatever, like the same way I did.
The Bitcoin Beach, that actually really fits well into my whole risk metaphor, because Bitcoin literally established a beachfront in El Salvador.
A beachhead.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Bitcoin's Normandy. That's right.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So not only is President Nayib a believer in Bitcoin, but he also kind of seems to be a straight up Bitcoiner. Like the guy's got laser eyes, man. Like he speaks like a Bitcoiner. Have you noticed these qualities about him as well?
I mean, he cottoned on to the Bitcoin discourse very quickly and like understood, even in his Spaces conversation with us, he seemed to be, you know, repeating a lot of these like Bitcoinery type phrases. So, I mean, he clearly spent a lot of time with Bitcoiners, you know, prior to going public with this announcement and passing this law and stuff. So it's pretty interesting to see a head of state so plugged in to like the Bitcoin community and its narratives and stuff like that.
It's really interesting, Nick, you compare him to like AOC, because like I just looked up his age. He's 39. I think that like barely fits as a millennial. So he's like an elder millennial on that end of the spectrum, right? And like, I mean, millennials, Gen Z, this very much seems to be sort of the digital generation here. And the way that he interacted with the Bitcoin community, assumed the culture, like joined your Twitter spaces, that like that's a whole social media savvy that you don't see very often in US politicians anyway. But like, I'm curious as to why you think he proposed this bill. And I should remind folks too, the El Salvadorian Congress voted overwhelmingly in favor of this bill as well. I think it was like 62 out of 84 total votes voted in favor. So it wasn't just the executive branch, the legislative branch actually voted in favor of it. But like, what were the reasons it was proposed, and why was this so favorable, seen as so favorable by the legislative branch?
Yeah, I mean, he enjoys enormous popularity. He's probably one of the most popular world leaders domestically, something like a 90% approval rating. one of the uncertainties was whether they would get a majority or a supermajority with the passage of this bill. They announced to us on that Spaces as the vote was happening that they got a supermajority, which was crazy to hear the like the votes roll in live on this audio chat. But yeah, I believe his party controls the legislature. You know, so they had the equivalent of like a blue wave over there. I mean, I don't know if like you would describe his party as blue or red, not to like put it under an American lens, but yeah, they have overwhelming like legislative support, so it's not like that surprising necessarily that you know his bill passed. But yeah, the crazy thing is just the speed of execution. I mean, the text of the bill was released on, or the announcement was on Saturday. They released the text of the bill on Tuesday, and then hours later voted on the bill. And the vote concluded at 2 a.m. You know, Eastern time. So they actually had this midnight session in Congress, which was crazy. And I actually think I said on the Spaces I would be complaining if I, you know, were a legislator and I had to read and understand this bill in like 30 minutes and then vote on it.
Right.
So we've talked about why this event is significant from the Bitcoin perspective, but let's talk about why this event is significant from the El Salvadoran perspective. Why is this good for El Salvador? What was the incentive for President Nayib to propose this bill? What was the incentive for Congress to ratify it? And why is this good for El Salvadoran citizens? Why do they think that this is good for the country?
So, like, honestly, the jury's out whether this will be good for regular old El Salvadoran citizens. And I want to be honest about that. Like, we don't know. Most of them are not Bitcoiners, obviously. I mean, like, the Bitcoin penetration worldwide is like single-digit percents. So, with the reaction I've seen from Salvadorans has mostly been confusion. You know, like, what is Bitcoin? How did this parallel, you know, internet currency come to be a you know, tender of the land? You know, am I going to have to use Bitcoin to buy things? So that's been like the main reaction that I've seen. Obviously, Salvadoran Bitcoiners are super pumped about it, but you'd have to assume they're not the majority of the population. So we'll see. Like, we'll see. The fact that Article 7 makes acceptance of Bitcoin for merchants mandatory, that to me is very different from just ratifying Bitcoin as a legal tender that is optional. That's different because at that point you move from elevating Bitcoin and eliminating frictions, and you move to potentially adding frictions because not every merchant is going to have the facility or the technological means to accept Bitcoin. It's not like Bitcoin merchant tools are ubiquitous in Latin America. They're certainly not. There's definitely startups that are like trying to solve this, but it's far-fetched to imagine that every, you know, taco stand or supermarket or small business has the means to actually accept Bitcoin. So I'm very curious as to see what that rollout is going to look like. I believe the law goes into effect in 90 days, and whether that's going to be enforced too.
Nick, was there like an exception if merchants didn't have the technical capability to accept Bitcoin? There was sort of like this carve out, this exception.
Well, they created this fund called, I think, Bandisol, which is a trust fund, which apparently will help manage liquidity between dollars and Bitcoin. But yeah, you're right. Actually, I think there might be some language in the bill about that, some like to the best of their ability. It's a very, very short bill, so a lot of it will depend on the actual means of implementation. So again, it's kind of a wait and see thing.
So,
But you know, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was like curious, right? So if it's not really for the El Salvadorian people, if they're kind of like mystified, look, we're already using a money. And by the way, Bitcoin isn't a great medium of exchange or unit of account anyway, anywhere. I don't even think Bitcoiners would say that it is. But like, it seems like the Bitcoin case for why a nation state should adopt Bitcoin is not being dependent on the monetary sovereignty of another country, right? So like El Salvador with US dollars as its money, as its currency, is very much dependent on, well, what is the US's monetary policy? And while interesting, last 12 months, we've had 5% inflation. Maybe that's really 12% inflation in US dollars. We don't know. And the monetary policy is really in the hands of, let's be honest, the elite baby boomers that are like part of kind of the US government apparatus, right? So the win, I would think Bitcoiners would say, the win for a nation like El Salvador is you have a credibly neutral monetary system rather than being dependent on another nation states. Is that what you think the president saw in this for his country?
I believe so. So I think there's two things going on. So that is my real answer for what I think is happening, is that it's a beginning of effectively a reprisal against the US for officially dollarized countries to stake out their own monetary sovereignty or to distance themselves a little bit from the Federal Reserve policy, which they're exposed to. Now, President Bukele denied this on the Spaces chat when I asked him, which is maybe fair and sort of diplomatic, because maybe you don't want to be super explicit about the fact that you sort of intend to de-dollarize long term. Because, you know, bad things have happened to people who have de-dollarized or like stopped selling oil for dollars. Like Gaddafi tried to get off the dollar standard for the sales of oil. So did Chavez. Iran has tried that.
Well, plus he
Saddam
also probably doesn't want to scare
well.
his own citizens who are just used to the dollar, right? Like we can, in the back of his mind, he can think like, maybe this is a 5 to 10 year phase out, maybe faster, maybe slower. But there's no point in just like bringing that up on day one, right?
Right. And this is an incremental step if that is what he intends to do.
Right.
You know, first of all, make Bitcoin on an even legal footing with the dollar, then maybe later on, you know, foreign exchange reserve conversion or, you know, more explicit distancing from the dollar. But here's a very interesting data point which kind of corroborates this theory. The US actually has threatened El Salvador with sanctions earlier this year. When Bukele, I believe certain officials in El Salvador, not state level sanctions, Bukele, I think, fired like a lot of the jurists like in their judiciary and like consolidated power in a certain way. And the US bristled at this and made some noises about potentially sanctioning, you know, members of the government in El Salvador. So my hypothesis, and I'm not an expert on this at all, you know, I only found out about, you know, the like politics of El Salvador pretty recently. My hypothesis is that that might have motivated this. So this might be a populist reprisal to the US government saying like, okay, like we're dollarized, but like we're going to introduce this other parallel currency. So in the case that you do proceed with sanctions, we're still going to have this, you know, alternative, you know, monetary network that we can tap into if necessary.
Yeah, I think people miss that there's like two things that Bitcoin provides, right? One is like the actual credible, neutral monetary policy against issuance. So you're not reliant on the Fed. But the second is credibly neutral value transmission, right? So you don't have to use like the SWIFT system that basically the US, you know, controls and can impose sanctions on them. So like there's these two aspects of, like we'd call that in crypto, like censorship resistance, that you get to benefit from. And you're saying it could be both of those potentially.
It could be either. Yeah.
But it's not something you want to come out and say, probably.
Probably not. But yeah, I agree. I mean, would I be concerned about US inflation? Actually, President Bukele did make reference to this. He made reference to the Cantillon effect, although he didn't, you know, specifically call it out, but he described it. So he basically said on the spaces that I hosted, he said, the US Fed is, you know, like aggressively printing money that's effectively monetizing the debt in the US, and those transfer payments are going to Americans. But the entire world bears the liability of inflation. Anyone that's dollarized bears the cost of, you know, very accommodative Fed policy and effectively inflation, but they don't, you know, benefit from that issuance. Certainly those transfer payments that are being funded by monetary issuance are not going to Salvadorians, they're going to Americans. And so he did kind of obliquely make reference to this hierarchical system whereby the whole world is exposed to the dollar. But right now it's a very nativist policy in the US where dollar inflation is, mainly benefiting Americans.
Nick, one of the big topics of conversation in this whole news is the Lightning Network. And also, after Bitcoin Miami 2021, the Lightning Network did definitely seem to have a big resurgence in just conversation. And I saw a tweet from you talking about how one of your big takeaways from the Bitcoin 2021 conference is the maturity of the Lightning Network. And notably, Jack Mallers, who heads up Zap, was one of the core liaisons with President Nayib and just Bitcoiners, Bitcoinerism. And so there was a direct connection between the El Salvador and the Lightning Network through Jack Mallers. Do you have any thoughts or reflections as to how the Lightning Network fits into this story, and also kind of the phase of development that the Lightning Network finds itself in at this present moment?
Yeah, I mean, the strike story is absolutely central in this, Bitcoinization, as some people are calling it, of El Salvador. Jack Mallers was apparently one of the main conduits here to the state, and Strike has a lot of usage down there and apparently is growing its user base. Now, can non-custodial Lightning apps power, an entire country's merchant payments? Like, in theory, there's not really any limit to what, the number of transactions you can do with Lightning. Of course, you need to open and close channels and things like that. Could it work? Probably. I see no technical barrier to that working. Do I think Lightning is going to become ubiquitous in El Salvador for brick and mortar merchant payments? Definitely not. Lightning is complex to reason about. These apps are still a little challenging to use. To be clear, I obviously use Lightning a lot, but it's enough to just understand Bitcoin, and then additionally to understand that there's this overlay network built on top of Bitcoin. That's a lot of work. So I don't think Lightning will have ubiquity in El Salvador, but I do think I agree that it's reached this good stage of maturity where it certainly works. I think people are reasoning about payments wrong. They think, oh, we can build these crypto blockchain based payment systems that just identically replace plug and play payment experiences in the real world. I think Lightning is much more interesting for content monetization on the internet, for streaming payments, for brand new payment experiences that weren't possible before, not necessarily just replicating these old world payment experiences for that centralized services, or QR code based payments like you have with Alipay. That seems to make a lot more sense.
And if I'm getting my details correct, the Strike app is actually one of the mechanisms as to how companies can kind of plug into this new law of Bitcoin as legal tender while still kind of denominating and thinking in dollars, because Strike has this treasury in the background and they manage risks, so they have a dollar neutral position. And so when El Salvadoran citizens are using Strike, they can actually be sending nominally dollars to each other while it's Bitcoin in the background. Are those details correct to the best of your knowledge, and is there any more illumination that you could shed on that?
Yeah, it's a little opaque to me. We're not investors in Strike. We've invested in similar countries providing digital dollars to Latin Americans, but not Strike. So I don't have precise knowledge. I believe there's some interplay with Tether, which is maybe a little perturbing. But and that's actually getting a little bit of press. But yeah, I believe that's the case. And we'll see. This will be a huge stress test for that entire infrastructure. It's important to me that even if there is a public, as in state created, funded, sponsored wallet that people use or are invited to use, that there be private sector alternatives, and that there be no restriction on the number of private sector wallets that people are allowed to use. So my hope would be that, there would be a good number of like non-custodial, semi-custodial, dollar-backed, like private sector wallet experiences that people could use should they want to transact with Bitcoin. Worst case would be like some sort of like custodial government app, which is the only way to make a Bitcoin transaction in the country. Or if they gave a license to like one or two wallet companies, I don't think that would be optimal.
It's not optimal, Nick, but would it be that bad? Right? It's like you don't have, I mean, we've had this conversation before about like difference between sort of, Ethereum, sort of a DeFi vision, which is like maximally bankless at all layers, and then kind of a Bitcoin vision, which is, it's got Lightning and some non-custodial sort of things, but can also scale from a Bitcoin bank perspective, right? And I think you've advocated for like, hey, that could be a reasonable way to scale so long as there is a free, open, private market building on top of Bitcoin as a settlement network and as a monetary network, right? It's like you can kind of get a Venmo type experience or an Alipay type experience now if you're willing to give up your private keys and just go custodial. That can work in an app very simply. Do you think that would be the end of the world if it all ends up sort of custodial payment driven in El Salvador?
So, yeah, it's a difficult question because you're right. I do believe that a hybrid network can be practical and work, whereby you do have custodial experiences like the same way that we've all used exchanges and Bitcoin banks, crypto banks, things like that. And so I think that can be a very strong complement to a base layer which is censor resistant, and gives you an array of transactional modes. However, in the case of El Salvador, the thing that makes me nervous if this were to end up, fully custodial, is the government mandate. The insistence that merchants accept Bitcoin, because then, you're eliminating free choice in currency, which is important. Like Bitcoin is ultimately about free choice and about, well, maybe if you are using a custodial service, you can always withdraw your coins. So if the government like ratifies like 2 or 3 custodial wallets or says you have to use the state sponsored Bitcoin custodial wallet to do your Bitcoin transactions, and merchants have to use the state sponsored custodial wallet, that eliminates the choice in currency to a significant degree. So I'm wary of a development like that. Like people don't really know this, but in Venezuela, like the government has created like Bitcoin like remittance services, as far as I understand. Like you can renew your passport and pay for it in Bitcoin or with the Petro. But I don't think people are really that excited about that or think that it necessarily empowers Venezuelans. So there's a big contrast between like the Maduro approach to embracing Bitcoin and just like the laissez-faire approach. And I naturally hope that that we get more of the latter rather than the former.
So just some numbers really quick. El Salvador is a country of 6.5 million people. And for context, that puts El Salvador right behind Maryland as the biggest state, and right above Indiana, 17th largest. And it's as a GDP, as a country, it's the 101st largest GDP country in the world. So, very relatively small country, relatively modest. But still, for Bitcoin, it's a whole entire country. And so to me, this is like Bitcoin's biggest test, right? We get to ask and hopefully answer the question, do 6.5 million people want to use Bitcoin when the barriers for using Bitcoin are their lowest in the world, right? Is the Lightning Network actually suitable to help facilitate this growth and adoption and help just grow usage of Bitcoin as a utility? To me, this is like Bitcoin's make it or break it moment, where we kind of find out, like, does people actually want Bitcoin? Is that kind of how you see this event as well?
It's I don't know if I want to put so much pressure on the people of El Salvador, but I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this plays out. There's a lot of ways it could go terribly wrong from a narrative perspective for Bitcoin. But it does mean that every economist now has to concede that Bitcoin is legal tender in at least one jurisdiction. So to me, that's like the strongest thing, is that it just signals Bitcoin's progression to a new phase of life. Now, do I actually expect 6 million Salvadorans to use Bitcoin in day-to-day payments? Absolutely not. Like, I think usage will still be pretty de minimis. I think the relevance of Bitcoin is chiefly like attracting crypto entrepreneurs to the country, attracting capital inflows. That seems to be a big part of what Bukele is interested in. And then more long-term, potentially kicking off a de-dollarization, or at least diversifying the set of monetary networks that El Salvador is exposed to. And they're not the first country to do that. Like, Iran has already kind of explicitly said, like, we're looking at the Bitcoin network in terms of like a way to settle international trade payments, things like that. Venezuela also apparently has like state-sponsored Bitcoin mining. So El Salvador is actually continuing this trend started by pariah states. What's interesting is they're the first non-pariah state, the first like sort of state that's actually part of the international community to do this. But yeah, that's the big trend, is like actually at the state level, I think, like diversifying their monetary exposure.
That's interesting you say like El Salvador is the first non-pariah state to start doing this, right? Although you did mention that it has kind of gotten in trouble in the past with maybe the U.S. government and some of the choices with this most recent president. But like, I guess this is another way at which Bitcoin is being stress tested, right? So this could be, as David said, Bitcoin's biggest test. And you have to wonder if it's also a test on the nation state level, right? So like the IMF issued something last week talking about having to seriously analyze the move of El Salvador. And you wonder if that's kind of tied into bank loans and international bank loans, this sort of thing. And you kind of wonder, like the analogy David and I were talking about in the intro to this is, does this lead to a Bitcoin Cold War, right? If we're talking about de-dollarization, this has got to mean de-dollarization to the powers that be, right? It's kind of a signal towards that. Does the US actually want that? Does the international community want that? Will they take steps to contain it? Will they take steps to sanction it in small ways or big ways? How do you think Bitcoin holds up against that? We've always called this the final boss, right? But like at some level, Nick, I feel like, look, the final boss hasn't really been paying attention to crypto at all over the last 12 years. It's just like this sideshow. Okay, geeks, yeah, you have your internet money, cool. Not really a threat, too volatile to be a threat. Now we have a nation state, a non-pariah nation state that's adopted it. So what are the powers that be going to do? How are they going to react to this?
That's the most fascinating part of this whole thing. And I think we've all known, I mean, you guys make this analogy all the time, talking about like the nation. This is the state of the nation, right? Talking about like, blockchain based systems as like new sovereign collectives, right? So like we've known for a long time now that there are geopolitical stakes here, and that crypto users are like staking out a new territory that's just not, it's not physical territory, but it's very real in terms of um, reimagining what their most relevant political affiliation and political unit is, right? So we've known this is happening, but this is just fascinating. It's an acceleration of what was happening. And I agree. I think that is going to be really the enormous big test here, is to see how the IMF, how the BIS, and obviously just like how the US like policy establishment is going to react to this. I think a lot of Latin American countries that have this kind of historical trauma from IMF intervention and from like sort of imperialistic US policy and meddling and supporting coups and things like that, they're not that happy with being vassal states of the US. We all know that the Washington Consensus, like the like system of institutions the US set up after World War II, is declining in stature. That's a fact. China has set up their alternatives, so now you have the Belt and Road Initiative. China has more, bilateral trade with more countries than the US does right now. So, there's like a neo Cold War there. But what Balaji said on the space was fascinating. He said El Salvador could be the first in this new non-aligned movement. Because if you remember in the Cold War, the first world, which was just Western countries that were affiliated with capitalism in the US, the second world, which was Soviet states, and then you had the so-called third world, and that was used to refer not to their level of development, but to their alignedness, to who politically they were aligned with, and they had chosen to not be aligned with either side. And I find Balaji's reasoning on this incredibly compelling. So you've got the dollar system, and you have to opt into the the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, things like that, and that tends to come with, like, if you can get that capital inflow into your country, it comes with stipulations. Become a free market democracy. Accept
Adopt the
trade,
dollar.
adopt the dollar, expose yourself to that discretion of, like, expose yourself to the risk of being beholden to the dollar infrastructure, which clears through one node in New York. And so that comes with stipulations. There's strings attached. On the other hand, you have, like, the Chinese model, which is probably, except the Sino CBDC, the digital renminbi. It's a pretty, like, exploitative model, frankly, if you look at the way China interfaces with a lot of its trade partners. But yeah, maybe we'll give you this nice package of investment. We'll build bridges, and we'll sell your president's surveillance technology, and we'll give you this payment system bundled. So, like, there's an emerging Chinese alternative too. But then maybe this is a third way. You have a monetary network where you're not exposed to Beijing, you're not exposed to Washington. You can store value outside of the confines of those two systems. You can transact outside of those two systems, and you can attract this capital base of sort of crypto entrepreneurs, crypto natives, digital nomads. And maybe that can be, like, the alternative in terms of foreign direct investment. And so I think President Bukele is kind of signaling that he wants a third way. I mean, he could have, subjugated them, their country to Chinese influence, or remained in, the tight, U.S. circle with the IMF and, like, the various other, international institutions. But this is potentially a signal that there's a third way here. And that's one of the most fascinating things I've come across in a long time.
This is super fascinating, right? So you've got the US, the first way, China, the second way, now this third way, which is adopting cryptocurrency. And this is kind of like the crypto domino theory. And maybe El Salvador is just kind of the first domino to fall. What other countries are next, do you think? Is it going to happen in Latin America, for instance? I've heard some murmurings from, like, Mexico and some other, Latin American countries about this. Is this where the next domino falls?
We don't know, but a lot of policymakers that have witnessed this and then immediately signaled their own affinity for Bitcoin are in Latin America. I won't enumerate them all, but you're talking about Ecuador, Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Panama. Like, policymakers, representatives, politicians in all those countries have made noises about Bitcoin laws. You've also seen governors of states in places like Texas and Florida, expressing kind of pro crypto views. But I think, like, your most likely candidates would be already dollarized nations, because these are places that already don't have the monetary independence, right? So they're not giving anything up. So already dollarized nations that maybe feel similarly to El Salvador, they feel hard done by historically in terms of the influence of the United States. And where remittances are, pretty material as well in terms of inflows, with the theory that, Bitcoin-based remittances are maybe more efficient. I guess that kind of remains to be seen whether that's true or not. So you might be looking at, Panama is a dollarized country. Officially, Costa Rica is a unofficially dollarized country, but if you've been to Costa Rica, you can transact with dollars there. Actually, they tend to, merchants there ask for dollars and they give you back the sucre, I think. So you get the soft money back.
Here, take my liability.
Yeah. That would be an interesting one. I think Ecuador had their own CBDC back in 2015. Nobody knows that. They didn't really succeed. It was kind of Tether-like, had some issues. But Ecuador had this spontaneous bottom-up dollarization that I talk about a lot. There's some good papers on that by Larry White. So those are maybe my three choices for like, if this is to continue to happen in Latin America, I would actually expect to see it from maybe one of those countries.
So historically, we have not seen good things happen to countries that deny or reject the dollar. America tends to invade these countries. I mean, this was what Vietnam was. This was what all of the Cold War was. We've supported multiple coups in Latin America. So it's not like out of the question for us to look at, good old Uncle Sam and like the hegemony of the dollar and say like, oh, like what's going to happen next? The difference between the 70s and 80s Cold War and the other coups that the America and the CIA has sponsored in Latin America is that this time it's that there is a cohort of Bitcoiners inside of America, right? It's not communism. It's not whatever that mess was. This is Bitcoiner. And Bitcoin is a global network with a global community. And that global community is very significantly domiciled inside of the United States. How do you see this dynamic really changing out this version of the future that we see coming toward us?
Yeah, I mean, like the U.S. empire's military adventurism has not been popular for 2 decades now. The Iraq War, like there were significant protests around that. The Iraq War had no justification for it. It was based on a contrivance, a lie. And, after the fact, we now learn that it was probably more to do with upholding this oil for dollars, trade, which keeps the dollar afloat, or at least policymakers thought it kept the dollar afloat. And that was probably, the primary justification for the Iraq War. Now today, looking back on it, virtually everyone would say it was a waste of money and, a pointless conflict. So, does the American people have the appetite for more military adventurism to support a fraying dollar standard that doesn't even work for regular Americans? Like the Federal Reserve policy has created enormous inequality, which is equivalent, in magnitude to, you have to go back to like the 1920s to find inequality that bad. So I don't think, most Americans have any allegiance really to the dollar system. It doesn't work for most Americans. So would they really support, a military expedition to, reinsert the dollar in these countries that are just peacefully opting out of it? I don't think you would find that level of popular support. So I'm not sure that that the dollar system has the credibility to attract, that level of a popular mandate. And yeah, as you say, there's probably 30 to 40 million Bitcoiners in the U.S. alone. So it's like an enormous demographic, and they're all going to be sympathetic to the Salvadorians.
Yeah, I've always, I think it's pretty easy to say without evidence that in 2020, the global population very much has a distaste for violence these days. We're too global of a population to really accept that anymore. Nick, there's a number of conversations that we want to get to, and we also want to bring in like perhaps the Ethereum or non-Bitcoiner perspective to this whole debate, and as well as a few other things, as well as a article from the Mises Institute as well, which had a critique on this move by El Salvador. So we're going to get to those conversations, but first, a moment to talk about some of these fantastic sponsors that make this show possible. Bankless is proud to be supported by Uniswap. Uniswap is a new paradigm in asset exchange infrastructure. Instead of a cumbersome order book system where trades are matched with other humans, Uniswap is an autonomous piece of software on Ethereum, which is what Ryan and I call a money robot. No human counterparties or centralized intermediaries, just autonomous code on Ethereum. Input the token you want to sell and receive the token you want to buy. Something brand new in the Uniswap ecosystem is the Uniswap Grants program is now accepting applications for grants. We have been saying this for a while and we'll say it again. DAOs have money and they are in need of labor. If you think that you have something to contribute to the Uniswap DAO, apply for a grant to Uniswap. Just look at the size of the Uniswap treasury. It's almost $3 billion. This mountain of capital is looking for labor. Do you have something of value to contribute to the Uniswap DAO? No matter how big or small your idea is, you can apply for a uni grant at unigrants.org and help steer Uniswap in the direction that you think it should go. That's exactly what we did to get Uniswap to be a sponsor for Bankless, and you can do the same for your project. Thank you, Uniswap, for sponsoring Bankless. Gemini is the world's most trusted cryptocurrency exchange. I've been a customer of Gemini since I first got into crypto in 2017, and it's been my main exchange of choice to make my crypto buys and sells. Gemini is available in all 50 states and in over 50 countries worldwide, and on Gemini there are markets for over 30 various different crypto assets, including many of the hot DeFi tokens, and it's one of the few exchanges that has liquid DAI markets. Gemini just launched their Earn program, where you can earn up to 7.4% interest on 26 various crypto assets. If you're tired of paying fees in DeFi, or you don't want to worry about DeFi exploits, but you still want to earn interest on your crypto assets, Gemini Earn is the product for you. Another product I'm stoked to get my hands on is the Gemini Crypto Back Credit Card, which gives you 3% cash back on all of your purchases, but paid to you in your preferred crypto asset. When I get my Gemini credit card, I'm going to make sure that I get my cash back in ETH. So whenever I buy something, I get a little bit of ETH bonus back to me at the same time. You can open up a free account in under 3 minutes at gemini.com/gobankless. And if you trade more than $100 within the first 30 days after sign up, you'll be gifted a free $15 Bitcoin bonus. Check them out at gemini.com/gobankless. All right, guys, we are back with Nic Carter talking all about El Salvador and Bitcoin. And the first half of the show was all about information and bullishness about Bitcoin. And in the second half of the show, we're going to bring up some of the critiques that we've heard. And I think the first critique that I really resonated with was from the Mises Institute, which wrote an editorial. And I thought the conclusion was worth bringing up here. They wrote, "Hopefully, El Salvador is on a path to a more prosperous future. Its long-suffering people surely deserve as much. For that, new ideas are needed. But an oily Keynesian president with slick American advisors, ? That's nothing new, not even when they put their plans in modern language about Bitcoin and put laser eyes on Twitter account. If the president really wants monetary freedom for El Salvador, he should not have presented them with what was effectively a government handout for Bitcoin holders and the companies behind the Strike app and other potential intermediaries. Instead, he should have simply repealed existing legal tender provisions and announced that the people would be free to use whatever medium they prefer for their transactions." Nick, how do you feel about this take from the Mises Institute?
Yeah, no, I'm sympathetic to that take. I mean, it's cool to see a nation state ratifying Bitcoin and making it legal tender, but I am, fundamentally skeptical of state power, right? That's like my stance on all this stuff. And I am not a fan of state mandates regarding currency. I, think that ultimately you get the best, consumer product if there is a free and open choice. And so Salvadorans are not exactly being presented with a choice here because of this this merchant mandate. So I think, a better way would be, eliminate, the legal tender provisions, as the Mises Institute says. So certainly this is exciting, but it's not without its drawbacks. I wish that the language of the law wasn't as focused on enforcing certain types of behavior, but rather on, eliminating hurdles. Although I guess all of that said, if you do want to foster a new monetary network effect, maybe you need some encouragement to get it started. But again, I don't actually see why you would necessarily strictly want a whole country to Bitcoinize. I mean, if it is happening organically, great. But is there a need? Is there a policy need to accelerate it? I don't see a need.
In the first half, Nick, we were talking about the reasons that President Nayib adopted Bitcoin and pushed so ardently for this, and we talked about maybe the sunny side of things, which is monetary independence for my people and a censorship-resistant value transmission network that no other sovereign can control. And those sound really good, but the critics' perspective would be, what if President Nayib is just another Bitcoin holder and wants to pump his bags, right?
He's got
what
laser
if
eyes.
that is the reason why, right? So let's be honest, we are all really excited about the upside to crypto, and everyone in crypto likes to talk about value, price go up. And in fact, Bitcoin's mantra is number go up. He wouldn't be a Bitcoiner unless he didn't want number go up. Is he just trying to pump his bags here?
Well, we don't know if he has Bitcoin. I mean, I think it would make more sense if that was the plan, to covertly acquire Bitcoin in their state reserves and then make a big song and dance about this whole thing. that doesn't appear to have been the way that it happened. It seems like through this this trust liquidity facility, they might acquire some Bitcoin over time, but they haven't gone about it in a way, that would suggest, okay, well, we have a financial incentive to make the value of Bitcoin go up, or rather, they could have extracted more value from it had they planned to do it in that way. So that's the thing that kind of shocked me a little bit. It's like making Bitcoin legal tender is like a big deal, and it's going to impose like new obligations on your citizens, and it might make them a little upset with you, right? So why not acquire Bitcoin in your reserves first and then do that? And then provide that sort of PR dividend and, reap the benefits of that. That's the thing that kind of confused me about this whole thing. I thought that there would be like a definite like chronology to it.
I'm curious about your take on this too, Nick. So let's say it was the case that President Nayib just did this to pump his bags. Maybe he's made some secret purchase, had a lot of Bitcoin, he's a big holder, or maybe he bought in 2012. We don't know. And let's say he did this. Is that a bad thing necessarily? Or is this just like, is the second order analysis here that this is ultimately how cryptocurrency and how Bitcoin gets adopted? It's through number go up, it's through greed. And this is how you build a bottom up store of value asset. There's no other way to do it other than this sort of thing. So I'm curious what you think of that second order analysis, that even if that's the case, maybe that's still good. Maybe that's how Bitcoin propagates.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I was reflecting on this because I was rereading Hayek's Denationalization of Money, which is like funny because we're talking about, the collision with the nation state. And Hayek felt that the best currencies would be price stable, right, relative to some basket of goods and services. And they would actually outcompete other currencies on the basis of that stability. But, reflecting on that, it looks like deflationary, non-stable, but, like constantly or, over the long term, deflationary currencies are the ones that are winning out, deflationary private currencies like Bitcoin. And so maybe Hayek was wrong about that, and making these things, deflationary by design by, implementing NGU technology. Like maybe that's more viral and maybe that's the secret to successfully monetizing a new non-state currency from scratch. So like we celebrate when we see like members of the Biden administration that disclose they have Bitcoin. Like there was a high level official recently, I think, that did a disclosure. And so that is kind of the way this thing worms its way into society. It like penetrates every echelon of society, and then people are positively disposed towards it. There's not that much you can do to stop it. I mean, people are ultimately going to act in their own economic interest.
Yeah, it's funny. This is not Hayek, but Hasu, whom you also know, made
Close
this very
enough.
argument.
Close
Right?
enough.
Close enough. Our modern Hayek is Hasu, and he basically made the argument that hey, all crypto communities that are trying to be non-sovereign store of value will converge on a deflationary monetary policy, right? So like we see with Ethereum, the Ethereum community is really excited about ultrasound money. Why? It's this convergence, right? And that's how a bottom-up money grows. If you're taking an academic or systemic perspective, you might say, well, actually, 4%, 4.3% annual inflation is actually the optimal golden number for a money economy, right? But then you turn around to like the academic, you say, yeah, but like, how do you get it adopted in a decentralized way? Because if that 4.3% inflation money is competing against a deflationary store of value, it's going to lose. So that's kind of the argument that Hasu makes.
I don't know how you got 4.3%.
The golden number, arbitrary.
Yeah, like what is it, like a local maxima or something, like maybe it's not the perfect equilibrium, but it's an equilibrium.
Exactly.
So like, ultimately you have to look at it from an evolutionary perspective. What are the traits that enable this organism to survive and replicate? And maybe one of those traits that's conducive to selection or whatever is like an attractive monetary policy as opposed to just a flat one.
Nick, one of the other lines of conversation that I've been hearing go around is President Nayib has previous flirtations with authoritarianism. He once marched the military into Congress and forced them to sign a bill that would give him like a bunch of helicopter tanks and some militia equipment, some surveillance equipment. He also ousted like 5 judges and the attorney general. And the concern from the Ethereum community, the Ethereum culture, towards the Bitcoin community, the Bitcoin culture, is that all these Bitcoiners are just over the moon and joyed with President Nayib in El Salvador adopting Bitcoin when he has a track record that stands for something that is very antithetical to Bitcoin. How does it concern you that there's some portion of the Bitcoin community that is just like ready to praise President Nayib regardless of past actions just because he accepted Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great question. I'm glad you asked it, honestly, because it's like a fine line, right? You're excited that we're seeing literally nation state adoption of Bitcoin, but at the same time, like no state is perfect, and El Salvador, I think, is like defined as like a troubled democracy or something, depending on whom you ask. Like, so yeah, I mean, certainly, I actually the first time I heard about Bukele was I read an Economist story about him long before this happened, saying like there's like a millennial authoritarian in control of El Salvador, and so I tried to ask him some tough questions on the space. Certainly, Alex Gladstein was on there and asked him some tough questions too. So I like to say that we weren't 100% purely positive and obsequious or whatever, that we weren't pure sycophants. But, it could certainly look that way to outsiders that see Bitcoin's cheerleading Bukele. I mean, I haven't like pulled punches like when I went on Bloomberg and also, described him as an authoritarian. So I'm, fully aware of like the contradictions there. I think like maybe the synthesis is, we can't stop anyone adopting Bitcoin, like whether it's a nation state or a dictator or whatever. Already some like pretty questionable places, states have some engagement with Bitcoin, whether it's North Korea is believed to be behind a lot of those attacks on exchanges, at the state level, Iran, Venezuela, etc. And, that doesn't mean that Bitcoiners are like embracing those countries just because they share the same network. I think the point of the network is that there is no moral or political like gating factor, on like who can do a transaction or whether a transaction is valid, unlike, the dollar network, for instance, where that absolutely exists. And so because Bitcoin is intended to be or is, truly permissionless in its usage, you're going to share a network with, bad people. And so that's why we say money for enemies. I think a lot of people need to remember that, is that, like we support, censorship resistance. That also means you have to bite the bullet and say censorship resistance for, like people that like are questionable in some way.
Does this feed into like Elizabeth Warren's recent narrative, for instance, which is like, hey, like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin specifically, is the money for terrorist criminals and rogue nation states. Now here's the first millennial authoritarian, and no big surprise, he's adopted Bitcoin because that's what authoritarians like. Does this give that narrative argument more power?
Yeah, but you can just flip it on its head and say like the biggest network is the one that has social scalability and doesn't impose any requirements or standards of behavior for those who choose to use it. And in my view, the best money is the one with the biggest network, the most number of nodes in the network. And so that's one reason why I think like Bitcoin will outcompete the dollar ultimately, because the dollar increasingly has all these conditions to like who you have to be and how you have to act to use the dollar network. And the administrators of that network, the node operators, the validators, they are like getting increasingly aggressive in imposing those conditions. So, and like Warren is like, she, as far as I can tell, she wants to promote the CBDC and use it to, implement her political agenda in society through the means of the money. That doesn't seem too dissimilar from like social credit, frankly, or any other like highly surveilled digital money system. And so like in my view, like I just think organically people will long term be attracted to a network that doesn't have these like political mandates built into it, that doesn't really care about who you are or like what you believe in. And yeah, of course that's going to include a lot of a lot of rogue nations and criminals and things like that. But I think that's actually the recipe for a successful monetary network.
So part of the recipe, I guess, for DeFi has been, and Nick, the Bankless kind of thesis on all of this is we love Bitcoin, we think it's fantastic. We're probably more bullish on Ethereum, and the reason is DeFi, right? So this sort of gives essentially a nation state like El Salvador an entire banking system in a box, where maybe we can get even further in the dream of having a Venmo type experience that's totally peer-to-peer, right? And you have an entire financial system. And so like a question in the DeFi communities, the Ethereum community's mind is, we wonder whether this is going to be the gateway to other crypto networks, for instance. And if you're doing Bitcoin, I know you're a big advocate of crypto dollars, for instance. Why not crypto dollars on DeFi rails? It seems like that could be actually a bigger gift potentially to the El Salvadorian people, where they get essentially this entire banking network that's digital out of the box. And maybe it's going to become one of the best banking network on the planet. It's an internet scale banking network. What are your thoughts on that? Will Bitcoin be the gateway to DeFi for El Salvador or other Latin American countries?
Yeah, I guess the question would be, like what does DeFi offer to Salvadorans, that's like really addressable to their lives? And like, early in the episode, I said, like, I actually don't think Bitcoin is that relevant to most Salvadorans. So, taking off my like crypto rose tinted glasses, like ultimately it's like cool to see a nation state adopting Bitcoin. But, is it going to move the needle for your everyday Salvadorian in a really material way? I'm not clear on that. And so I would probably extend that to DeFi. Like, is there a feature of DeFi that would really materially benefit, Salvadorian? I'm not sure, I'd have to think about that.
Well, one thought for you then is like, so 80% of El Salvadorians are bankless. And I don't mean that in the way that we mean it. I mean, they literally have no bank, right?
Yeah.
And so you could imagine something like if Ethereum gets its roll up ecosystem working, kind of a layer 2, you combine sort of a mobile type experience with like MetaMask and crypto dollars. And maybe you have a digital bank account like right out of the gate. I know there's probably not laptops and this sort of thing, but the mobile phone saturation might be a bit higher. There might be a way to do that as like one potential idea. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's plausible. It's plausible. There's just a lot of work that has to be done primarily around education, I would say, in terms of getting people to understand what it's like to use a digital bearer asset and, the responsibilities involved there. So that could well emerge. Like high yield dollar-based savings accounts that are, plug into DeFi on the back end. I think that will require like probably intermediaries that look like regular old fintechs, and make those experiences totally frictionless. But I think that's probably more of like a medium term outlook.
Nick, as we come to a close here, I want to kind of zoom out and have more of a higher level philosophical conversation using this El Salvadorian event as context. One thing that I think has become really obvious to me is the priority differences between Bitcoiners and Ethereans with how they approach adoption, right? Bitcoin wants to be very, very physical, right? Like the risk metaphor of Bitcoin claiming El Salvador, like Bitcoin wants a march through physical territory throughout the world and become, legal or supported tender throughout the world. And you can also see the same sort of interest in, Bitcoin mining, where Bitcoin mining really wants to be hooked into the physical power grid of the physical world, right? And even within this El Salvador news event, like they have plans to literally make a Bitcoin volcano, where the Bitcoin integrates with a volcano. Ethereum is very different. Ethereum has no interest in being the unit of account or legal tender for any sort of nation state. It wants to be the unit of account on the internet, right? And not only, and it also doesn't want to be instantiated in a proof of work network. It wants to be instantiated in a nebulous online virtual proof of stake network. Do you have any reflections on this cultural divide and differences in goals for these two different crypto networks?
Yeah, that's really like fascinating way to put it. I mean, Bitcoin is, to me, like Bitcoin isn't just like a digital version of gold. It's like literally synthetic gold. Like I think of it as like the successor like to gold. And so these physical analogies make a lot of sense to me. Like, you know, the way we talk about mining, it's very physical. A lot of Bitcoiners think Bitcoin is literally backed by energy. I don't think that, but a lot of Bitcoiners do. So you're right. It's got this kind of like, some people describe proof of work as gravity, as attaching weight to blocks. So all these physical metaphors do exist. And yeah, I think of it as like following this progression of like gold, like this neo gold that's like spreading throughout the world, and like mostly households, and then later investment funds, and then later governments, you know, holding some gold, the same way, like the same distribution that gold has. So I think that's a very apt comparison. And you're right, Ethereum, it doesn't really aspire to these things. It's completely different. It's a, you know, computational lubricant kind of thing. So yeah, no, I don't have that much to add. That's well put.
So, Nick, let's project this. If you can make any sort of crazy projections or predictions for, you know, as a result of the repercussions of this particular event, like what do you think is the most likely next steps in this story?
I think there will be a backlash probably as the law gets implemented, and you know, Salvadorians are like, what the heck is this Bitcoin thing? Like, you know, I lost my channel backup on the Lightning Network or whatever. You know, and some like the UX difficulties come to the fore, and then the press is going to, you know, go to El Salvador and be like, hey, no one's using Bitcoin, so it was you know, it's like a flop or whatever. I think that's probably pretty likely. I also think the IMF is going to start to say like their assistance is conditional on countries not adopting Bitcoin. So I think we'll see some, I think we'll definitely see some backlash from the international development organizations. IMF is the most important one because they deal with, you know, short-term lending to governments that are troubled. I do think that we'll continue to see sovereign adoption. I think we will see countries adopt Bitcoin in their foreign exchange reserves, not just with legal tender laws. But the most obvious move here for me is diversifying their foreign currency exposure by adding Bitcoin. Bitcoin is now a foreign currency, right? It is the currency of the land in El Salvador. They could never take that away from us. But yeah, I do think this progression will continue. I think some of the younger politicians that are more forward-looking will recognize that there's this Bitcoiner demographic which has spontaneously emerged in their countries, and they want to appeal to it. And they won't. This bidding war is going to be kicked off between nation states, you know, using tax policy as the primary thing to attract like this like very liquid wealth, you know, which has emerged and is controlled by like young crypto entrepreneurs, you know, like digital nomads. Like that sovereign individual thesis is real. You know, like it's happening. Bukele was one of the first heads of state to realize it, but he's not going to be the last. So, you know, it's a very exciting time to be, you know, kind of a sovereign individual. You know, like to the heads of state of the world, like, you know, you're welcome to bid for my, you know, for my presence. Like I will happily like
join Nick on Twitter Spaces, talk about Bitcoin.
Make me an offer. Like I'll move to your jurisdiction, you know. There's a lot of us. There's like 100 million of us now, so we're mobile.
We talked about this. Nick, thank you so much for joining us on this. This is definitely, we've talked about in our Josh Rosenthal episode that this is kind of the crypto renaissance. Like the 2020s are certainly going to be interesting for the sovereign individual. We're glad you are with us on that journey. Nick, thanks for stopping by and telling us all about this.
This has been fun, guys. Really fun. Let's do it in less than a year next time for the next episode.
And we'll lubricate those gears, get you a Bankless t-shirt for next episode, Nick. Guys, risks and disclaimers. First of all, David wanted me to let you know, like and subscribe if you are enjoying this feed. That's how we propagate it to more hearts and minds. This is a battle for hearts and minds. Nation state versus crypto networks. Of course, risks and disclaimers. None of this was financial advice. ETH is risky. Bitcoin is risky. All of crypto is. DeFi is too. You could lose what you put in, but we are headed west. This is the frontier. It's not for everyone, but we're glad you're with us on the Bankless journey. Thanks a lot.
Hey, we hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, head over to Bankless HQ right now to develop your crypto investing skills and learn how to free yourself from banks and gain your financial independence. We recommend joining our daily newsletter, podcast, and community as a Bankless Premium subscriber to get the most out of your Bankless experience. You'll get access to our market analysis, our alpha leaks, and exclusive content, and even the Bankless token for airdrops, raffles, and unlocks. If you're interested in crypto, the Bankless community is where you want to be. Click the link in the description to become a Bankless Premium subscriber today. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for in-depth interviews with industry leaders, Ask Me Anythings, and weekly roll-ups where we summarize the week in crypto and other fantastic content. Thanks everyone for watching and being on the journey as we build out the Bankless Nation.